much. But what it reminds me of is something like I learned relatively recently, in the last few years, I'm embarrassed to say, which is that I realized that, like, unless you're actually writing something, you're not writing. Because I spent decades thinking that if I was wandering around thinking of interesting stories, no matter how much I thought about that story,
right,
or how detailed it was in my head, if I wasn't writing it down into a structure, then it was not writing. It's just a bunch of garbage that's floating around in there.
Hey, thanks for listening. I don't know if it's just me or if it's everyone else, but I have the hardest time shifting gears. And I remember how much harder it was for me to do that, 10 plus years ago when it came to integrating the idea of writing into my work schedule. And I recall I would sit in my studio and I would never get any writing done. I would probably open files up. I would look at things. I was so focused on my design client work that I had the emails on. I had those programs open, maybe some project files open. It was very hard for me to commit to writing. I didn't permit myself to take the time, and it was there. It wasn't like I was, 9 to 5, 5 days a week. I had, my schedule was relatively flexible and I could make the time to do it, but I wouldn't. And I'm sure a huge chunk had to do with the fear of the unknown, being uncomfortable with the idea of writing versus drawing or designing, which are so visual. It was super tough. And, and the classic, create other distractions, motif came into play. So I think what it was is that I had this fear of starting and not finishing another thing. I remember, I don't know how many years ago, 8 years ago, I created what I called the Loose Ends Project, which was this thing based on my dismay at all the sort of unfinished creative projects I had in my studio that I had moved from New York to Atlanta to back to New York to New Jersey to Asheville. I guess maybe I needed to do to some degree to be able to cross them off this invisible list of my psyche to move on to the next thing. And finishing the projects didn't happen overnight, nor did the jumping into the writing. And then I find myself, that gear, and I said gear shifting earlier, now with my design client work picking back up, there's this definite whoa, how do I make that time? How do I make sure that I'm doing the thing for both things? But the hard part is that client work is there, and it's hard to negotiate phone calls and emails that come in, and I need to address these client needs because they aren't going to sit and wait for hours for me to get around to it. So then writing sort of becomes a little bit of a gap filler, and that's okay. Anyway, I'd love to hear how you handle your shifting back and forth. If anyone wants to share with that, you can do it. I think you can do it in the comments below on the Substack. Speaking of which, if you aren't listening to this through Substack, it's totally cool however you listen to it, but it'd be great if you subscribe. That way you can get a notification when episodes come out. I would love to do some extra episodes later this year. We'll see how that goes. There's a huge list of people I want to talk to and a huge list of people I've spoken with before that I would love to speak with again. And that, if that list is taken care of, then I don't have to make a new email to a new guest for the next year and a half. And I don't want to miss out on talking with new people as well. So time is precious, but we'll see. I do really enjoy these talks. Anyway, go check out the Substack. You can find the link anywhere on any of my social media @JAlexMorrissey or jalexmorrissey.com. This week's guest is Karl Kerschl. Karl he's a writer who draws. He's got some great stories. I've seen his work for a while, but I met him at a convention and we had a really nice chat. And that's always a great indicator of like how one of these talks are going to go. He is super thoughtful and really, really eager to push his craft as a storyteller on every front. He's done a lot of great work for Marvel, DC, and other companies. So he's got a handful of his own creator-owned projects of ISOLA and his ongoing webcomic, The Abominable Charles Christopher. And then he has Death Transit Tanager, which is totally rad. We both got really lost in the conversation and didn't recognize the time go by. So he's bound to come back because we have more to say. And this is me with Karl Kerschl. Congratulations on the Kickstarter completion, because it's nice to get out of the way.
Yeah, it's being completed as we speak. The majority of it is. I still have to do because part of my Kickstarter was also doing commissions, like a limited number of commissions and like cover sketches and things. So I have to do that stuff, but we'll have to complete that stuff. So that's all kind of going out afterwards. But but I want to get just the majority of like all of the standard packages out the door, so people have them in their hands. Especially before New York Comic Con, because I'm going to go to New York Comic Con in October with a bunch of these books, and I want people to have had them mailed to them before I show up with the same the same comics for other people who are not backers.
And or do the like, hey, I'll bring it to you at the show if you're coming, kind of thing.
There's also that, yeah. Which is, I don't mind. Like I get why people want to do that, but I always like when you're gearing up for these shows, it's like the last thing on your list is like remembering to bring custom things. So yeah,
I just think it invites error. It invites error. You either you miss something, and that person shows up, and you don't have the thing for them, and that's like so it's you never know.
I was supposed to bring one of the original pieces to Heroes Con for someone, and then totally forgot about it. How have you been since then? Anyway, that was a couple months ago now.
Good. Yeah, good. I've been writing doing a first draft of my next novel. So I've just been, I guess since I've seen you, I've written 70,000 words for the next book. So just kind of plodding along, head down. Today was the first day in nearly 2 months that I did not write in the morning. I had a big client presentation for a design project. So I had to get up early and make sure everything was squared away before we talked with them. So that was it's a very weird feeling. Like, when you've been writing, drawing on a book, for a long time, and then you're like, you have some time off. It's a very strange, oh, I should be drawing, right? I should be writing something.
I'd love to talk more about even just your process in writing in general, because it's where my head's been for the last couple of years, really, because now for me, the drawing part of it is just like the work, the writing part of it is where everything's simmering and where I'm inspired. And when you're walking around, you're on walks and your brain is just on crunching away on a chunk of story. Like that's where I'm finding all my creative joy. Then after that, it's just executing the thing. Yeah. Hoping to make it what I'd envisioned or what I'd actually written.
It's like penciling a page. I remember that feeling. I would I had my thumbnail, solved all those problems, and I would sort of make the whole page in a rough, I'd rough it all out. And then I would go, oh, now I got to render it. Like it was like, that was this chore process from the storytelling was the part that I realized that was the exciting part for me. And it's funny you asked that, because I was, looking through your work and thinking about it. Like I was looking I'm like, oh, I can see a timeline in your evolution of like defining and stepping out saying, I'm writing stories. Like you can see the line for you, like, and I'm like, oh, okay. Cause you did the abominable stuff. And that's like the evolution of like stretching out to long form and the opportunity, like, but in small bite-sized chunks. And then, like, reading, Death Transit, I'm just like, oh, okay. Like this is like really good story. And the funny thing is I've read it twice now and both times my mind went into different directions as to what was going to happen, which I was pretty excited about because this resolution wasn't what I was sort of fabricating, which is always a good sign for my mind. So I'm actually kind of psyched that you want to talk about that. So for me, it took me a long time to say that I was going to write something. I wrote things, I rewrote stuff as a means to an end, like at Marvel. I didn't seek it out as a thing that I felt I could do because I didn't have a piece of paper that says I could write something and a piece of paper that says I could draw something. So that was my mental hang up. But I got so much joy putting my sample pages together over the years of being an artist because I got to write a story. I would write that 6-page story with all the intention of catching the eye of an editor and having them go, "Oh, I really like what you do here." Probably should hand them a script while I was doing it. But what was it for you that you said, like, I'm going to write something?
Well, I think I don't want to say I had no interest in it before, because I think I always had a vision for the things I was working on, even if they were written by other people. I always felt like I had, or at least wanted to have a hand in the narrative aspect of it. But when I first started, it was really, I was just figuring out how to tell a story visually. So I was totally satisfied with that. Like that was enough of a challenge. But Brendan Fletcher and I, having grown up together and having kind of discovered comics together, I should say what we really discovered together was story and story structure and the art of how to tell a story, either well or poorly. And whether it was from reading comics and studying them or analyzing film, like we just talk about this stuff all the time. We've worked on things that never saw the light of day, that were just attempts at stories. Like they were really they were above what we were capable of, but we didn't know that at the time. So I just think we learned a whole lot as like fledgling writers that we'd never, we were never paid for any of that work. We never really became credited professionals until a lot later. But I learned so much during that time, and what it did for me was sort of give me an appreciation of when things are not right. Like I could then watch a movie or read a book or read a comic book and know when a story is just not right. Like I just had like a sense of it. It comes down to I think just taste on some level, where you're just like this almost works, but it could be just tweaked in this little way to make it make it 10 times better. And having said all that, like I think I've been doing it for so long, but never professionally. And so when it came, I think the first, like when I was working on Adventures of Superman with Greg Rucka, he was open to input. Like we'd have phone conversations where we'd talk about, he'd have a story planned out for what was happening in those issues, but there was room for me to just talk about stuff and say, I think it'd be cool if we did this, or like what if we same story, but what if we went to this point of view or whatever, things like that. That kind of gave me my first taste of doing that professionally. And then Teen Titans Year One, I think, was when I have no writing credit on Teen Titans Year One,
Right.
and I did not write it, but I did, I think, work with Amy Wolfram a lot because she had never written comics before.
Mm-hmm.
So she was coming from an animation background. She was a writer for the cartoon, and she had no idea what was expected of her as a comic book writer.
Mm-hmm.
And so we spent hours just talking on the phone, and in a way that I had never done with other comic book people. Just talking about character and themes and mood, and just what we wanted for this thing. So I felt like I had a real heavy hand in the way that book turned out, and I think it's like I was told in a recent interview, someone, because it's hard to have any perspective on this stuff yourself, but I was told that is the point at which I think my work became a little more individual.
Yeah.
I think prior to that series, I was doing, I was drawing comic books,
Mm-hmm.
and then as of Teen Titans, I think you could see more of my character come through. And then it was, I think, a year after that, I started Abominable Charles Christopher, which was just like an exploration, like really like baby steps into like, quote unquote writing.
Right. Well, and it's interesting. I'm thinking about tracking like how that went for me, and I remember, I've worked with some writers who had never written before. And like, I remember having to rewrite a whole issue because the script was identical to the first issue. It was just kind of a different location, but the same beats. And I'm like, oh, that's not probably exciting for the readers. So I called the editor and said, hey, could I rewrite this, but I'll have it end in the same spot. They were like, sure. Okay. And that was it. And there was a series of this kind of things where I feel that like you get a little bit of your hands wet in the unofficial capacity, and you kind of get to see like where all those sort of the organs are, and you go, oh, okay, I get that. And you were talking about that sensibility and feeling of story, whether it's in the failed efforts of trying to do something much larger than yourself or your abilities, and the obsessive nature of studying the subject of storytelling. So those kind of two things kind of come together, and then parts of the stories become clear to you when you can now look at something and say, oh, well, that's missing this, whatever the thing is, which help you when it comes to looking at your work and feeling like I explain a lot of how I see story when I'm writing it's like, like synesthesia, where you see colors from sounds. Like for me, like I feel shapes when I'm writing. I can feel what needs to fill a space. Mm-hmm. And whether that's whatever part of the story has to be, then I can kind of make whatever goes into that space to make it all kind of an object. And yeah, I get what you're saying, and that it's kind of cool. And you've also, you have a good friend who you grew up with, which was kind of helpful for someone who was seemingly pretty focused on the writing aspect of stories. And then getting to work with like, Becky, who's an artist who was doing writing. So that's also sort of this template of like, hey, you can do this.
Yeah, I think Becky's followed kind of a similar path, except she got into writing her own stuff, or at least co-writing her own stuff earlier than I did. I mean, she always had a real vision, like she's like Becky Clune in comics. I feel like, she found her way long before she was doing mainstream stuff. Like, like the best Becky stuff is the stuff that she just goes off and does on her own. But it's interesting to see her getting into just the writing end of things, because she clearly has she's got a great sense of emotional timing. She knows what not to show, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, wow. And it's so interesting because, comic books and prose are very different executions, but there are these really important aspects of what do you reveal to the audience? And, and I'm using the word not pejoratively, but the immature writer will want to show everything because they want to show off. They're very excited about what they're doing, while it takes a time to gain this sort of the sensibility and maturity to go, hey, I think I need to hold these cards. And then sometimes you need to show the cards. You just need to know what you kind of know what the audience has to get to keep them on the hook.
Mm-hmm. Which really, like, the more you think about, the more I think about it, the more I try to deconstruct what a story is, the more I think that's all it is. It's just keeping someone interested from page to page or from panel to panel or whatever, right? I mean, like, as long as you're doing that and there's some kind of closure, I think you've told a story. Like, I don't think it's much more complicated than that. It's just
no, it doesn't have to be allegory. It doesn't have to be anything, greater than just entertainment. When it is more than that, fantastic. Right.
Then it's transcendent.
Yes.
But it's hard to shoot for that. Like I think when you're trying for these big swings, I think that's when things become slightly disingenuous.
So that's a really strong thing where I think, going back to the newer approach, the newer writer aspect is, listen, we all want to write all this amazing, great stuff. I mean, that, like, nobody sits down to write something that's saying like, I just want to make something. Like, I mean, you really want to try to wow people. But what I think a lot of people don't understand is that, like, when you write something, just like when you draw something, that drawing isn't done. You have to, like, erase things and fix things and make it work into a piece. And the same thing goes with stories. You have to sketch out what this idea is. And you don't really initially put in all these elements that people go, oh my God, that's that thing. Or this could mean, like, this could be foreshadowing for something else. Often that foreshadowing doesn't happen in that first early draft. And when you're new at it, you think, well, I guess I'm not really good at it because because you just basically you throw your cards out there on the table too soon, or you don't know where to put them, but you're not giving yourself the kindness of saying, okay, I got the tent poles up. Now let's put the canvas over it. Let's tighten the things. Let's put some lamps in here. Let's turn it into something. And it takes a while to do that, rather than just, vomit it out on a page as some perfect object.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot about my approach to writing a story. Well, now I'm writing stuff that I'm drawing also for DC, right? So, like, when I write scripts for that, like, I did some short stories in Batman. I'm working on another thing now, but it's the first time I've actually had to formally write it. Actually, I don't even know if I have to. Like, I think I could just write Marvel style notes, but I wanted to try formally writing a script, for this 3-part thing I'm doing, and I have to, in order to do that, I feel like I spend a lot of time just in the synopsis stage, like a few paragraphs about each issue of this thing, and, like, really everything when I'm writing these scripts hinges on that, like, whether those hang together. Like, if these synopses hang together, then I can basically get it. It's like having a roadmap, and you can't really go too far wrong there. But when I'm working on, like when I'm doing the Abominable comic, like, none of that is there. Like, there's no plan or roadmap at all. It's just whatever, because it's basically essentially a weekly gag strip. I'm just kind of going, week to week or strip to strip. And the fact that any narrative occurs at all is almost accidental, almost unwelcome. Like, I didn't want to do that. It just started happening.
So, okay, you were talking about the difference between writing and writing for yourself as an artist, and that's a really common. I love having this discussion because I am a person who did it all the time. Where it's a piece of paper and a pencil is how you write your comic book story. You start making rectangles and you start filling in little shapes to like with clay, form this storyline. And then you look at it and you go, okay, I think I can put words to this. Like you kind of, that there's your story. And it's kind of this, it's this kind of almost sideways way of, of writing. And, and I did it and I did it. And I remember but the funny thing is, like, my first story that I got paid for, I just knew that I had to write a script. So I sat down and wrote a script. So it was
not for yourself.
No, it wasn't for me. This was for Marvel. And it was just one of those kinds of things, but I didn't do, my synopsis was in my head. I wasn't smart enough to have put it down on paper and look at it and kind of revise it. I just had the idea and I kind of blobbed it out. But I think the synopsis is so powerful because it's so short and it allows you to make huge changes with 2 or 3 words, which isn't a script. You can get a lot of heavy lifting done by how you organize your sentences and you put those things together to tell that story in, whatever, 2 to 3 paragraph, 2 to 3, sentences or a paragraph. And I love that. I love crafting a story from that, maybe making a log line, what's this about? Like sort of like, if you were a journalist and you were assigned, hey, chief, I got an idea for a story. Well, what's it all about? And you need to say what it is in that one shot in that very short little log line. And I think that's a great way to kind of tackle stories because it allows you to not get bogged down with details.
Yeah. Yeah. I tend to not like, I don't like thinking about like themes, like in the uppercase, like
don't break yourself in themes. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do go into, like, if I'm asked to write a thing, I go into it thinking like, what do I want this to be about? Like, what are the couple of things, could be just one thing that I want this story to be about? Like, what do I want to accomplish with this? And usually it's just like, I'd like this story to at least end with this character having this realization about themselves or something, right? Like that's it. Like if I accomplish that one thing, then I think that issue is a relative success.
Right.
Like if I can just get that stuff across. Well, and that's really my only, like, that's just my North Star. Like, is like, I'm writing these scenes and is it about this character getting to this point? If yes, then we're still okay.
Then continue on.
I'm on a tangent somewhere.
Go back to page 1. No, and that's, and the thing is that, like, if you do it like that, going back to what you said earlier about, telling a story, you were successful. You know what I mean? Like you've succeeded in doing your job. If you have this thing written down saying, this is what I want this to end, how I want it to end, and this is what I want to have happen, and you can get there through your narrative and on the page, well, then you've done your job. Like it's there. How did that go for you? You said you didn't, I guess you didn't have to write a script for yourself, but you did. And what was that like? Did you sit down blank page approach, or did you sketch, or how did you go about it?
No, it was, I was asked to write, I was asked to write and draw a 3-part story, like a thing for this Brave and the Bold series. And my editor specifically asked if I would do, because I had done these short stories with Batman and Maps Mizuguchi from the Gotham Academy series. As Rob, one I did just as a lark. I just put her in as Robin in one of these black and white stories, which was a really fun thing to do. And then the next one, he asked me for more of that kind of stuff, and so I did a 3-part backup story in Batman, which I was happy with, and now I'm doing this thing, and so each one is progressively longer. Like I started with an 8-page story, and then I did 3 8-page stories, and now I'm doing 3 22-page
right on
issues. So they're getting bigger, and I feel like it was a nice way for me to just kind of psychologically ramp up to being able to expand these things into that size. turns out it's not that difficult. There's always sprawl, right? But but in this case, I was asked to do this thing, and so I just thought about it for a while, and I sent in I just basically wrote down a bunch of like ideas of things that I think would be fun little stories and subjects, and then I sent in like a few paragraphs of synopsis of what I wanted to do, and I had a talk with my editor, and he was cool with it. He had a couple of questions, and then once it was approved, I thought I could have started drawing it just from that.
Okay. Nice.
But it was, just because I wrote them, I knew what I had intended. But I thought I would like to at least go through the motions of writing a full script, just in case, like I kind of thought, like, I'd like to write this as though someone else was going to draw it.
It's the best way to do it.
Yeah, just to put myself through the paces of doing it, and also maybe someone else is going to draw it. I don't know. Who knows what's going to happen? So I wrote, I've written a complete script for the first of these 3 issues, and it was a really cool experience. It was, I had my synopsis to go by, and what I did was I took the synopsis and basically chunked it into, like, I'd say, like, this scene I think is about 3 pages. This scene's I think about 2 pages, and then just so I had the right number of pages, and then I just went from there, and sometimes the synopsis had like little bits of sample dialogue that occurred to me as I was writing. But largely it was just filling out the scenes, like filling out the structure, the skeleton I'd built, and then, as like all these happy accidents occur when you're actually creating a proper setting. Then you've got all these other characters and bits of business that occur, and like bits of dialogue that branch off into other interesting directions, and I think that's where the real fun is for me. I like scripting that stuff because I think that's where the characters come to life. Yeah. And then when you're drawing it, you really know, like, there's no question about, like, what is the emotional thrust of this scene, like what expression should this person have, and also, like, not to overlook like how much space do I need in this panel for word balloons, which is something that I never really gave much thought to before. I mean, I would try to vaguely leave space for writing, but but now, like, I'm forced with, like, whatever I've written on the page, like, I know, like, this has got to fit here and this is how it's paced. So I really enjoyed the process. I'm looking forward to fully scripting the next couple of issues. Yeah. It's where, as I said before, I think it's where I find the most joy. And like after that script was done, I was like, okay, well, now just like the slog of drawing this. I gotta draw this now. Yeah. Well, yeah. It's so that's the what you're touching on is the really interesting part about writing versus drawing, because the when you were sitting there with words, and your fingers on a screen or on paper, these, as you said, the happy accidents, they happen. Like this context of the environment, the things in it, they all interact like some sort of chemistry experiment. And you have these things happen where the character comes up with an idea for you while you're putting it down, which solves the problem in either a unique way that you didn't see coming or a far more exciting fashion. And you're able to go, okay, cool. Let me follow this lead, versus if you had to draw this all out and then put a script to it, you would be really tied to whatever you drew. And this allows you to kind of make these story changes at a far faster rate. Backspace. Okay, we'll change that. And I think it is exciting. It's really bloody exciting. I mean, drawing's exciting too, but you have to kind of wait for the delivery vehicle. While writing, even though you have to go back and fix things up, because maybe your grammar's not there or whatever the thing is, and you have to go back and script it, to cut down on language. But the story part of it happens at a much quicker pace. Yeah. Plus, there's something, part of me just loves the format of a screenplay. Like, I just like writing, and I like reading them. I like reading screenplays or comic book scripts, and I like writing in that format where like I'm doing a chunk of description, character dialogue, blah blah blah. Like I just find it a very natural, pleasurable way to write and read.
It was, writing comic book stories. I mean, I was a terrible student in school when they would, hey, here's your English assignment and make an outline. And I was horrible at making outlines, but comic books were a great way to figure that out, because it's so beat oriented. It's just action, 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 action. And you can log line these things one after another, after another, after another to get what you think the form of the story is. And you can kind of then grab these things, say, yeah, that seems to be about like how long I want to have this dialogue scene happen, or this action scene, or whatever these elements are. And then you can say, okay, well, I need to stretch this because I have 22 pages versus 12 pages. So you can kind of, fill out more things, make characters have more moments. But it's a great way to learn how to structure, like you're saying with a screenplay. How do you structure? You can just beat these things out.
It's really, I think you're given a lot of help in that regard, in that capacity, like by the medium and the genre. Like I know I have this many pages, and I am writing a superhero story. So like, I'm writing a Batman story, so if like I better get to some Batman stuff pretty soon. Like I laugh with my wife all the time, because she's like, I just tell her like, well, I gotta have Batman punch someone here. He's like, why? It's like, well, if Batman's not punching, if he's not solving a crime or punching someone in here, for at least a third of this issue, then it's not a Batman comic. Like, what
it's
am
a Bruce Wayne story.
Yeah. Which actually this is very much a Bruce Wayne story, but that I'm doing. But there is you still got to have a bunch of Batman stuff in there.
Totally.
And that's helpful. Like like I could really go off in all kinds of directions, but you've got to remember what you're doing here. Like I'm writing a Batman story. Like I got to get back to like. That's enough of these people talking. As interesting as it may be, something's going to happen that Bruce Wayne's going to put on a suit and punch somebody.
Right. The drum solo can only last so long. We've got to get back to the lead singer. It
sounds so stupid to kind of verbalize it that way, but it does come down to that all the time.
Well, because when you're playing with other people's toys, you have to respect what that toy is. You can't just ignore the toy. I mean, unless you've pitched the story like, hey, this is all about the guy who comes in with a blind auto mechanic who fixes the Batmobile for Bruce Wayne. Okay, that's a cool story. We'll watch that whole thing and we'll see what happens in the background of this one. But it is Batman, and people want to see the Cape Crusader do his thing.
I learned that, like as I was saying, just hanging out with Brendan and talking about it, was like, I don't know, like I was probably like 18 or 19, where it just hit me like we've been talking about it. It just hit me like a lightning bolt that like, hey, like your title is everything. Like if your story's not what your title is, then then it is wrong. Like this thing has to be, if it's called Batman, then you're running a Batman thing. Like it's again like so elementary, but like but it can go so wrong. People go so far afield and not right to what the actual material is.
It's genre. Like if you think about it, like people who buy romance novels or mystery novels or fantasy novels, there are expectations that are baked into that system. Now, if you want to subvert that, great, fantastic, all for you. But the thing is that you better be better than everybody else if you're going to subvert, because the expectations sit there. And the same happened with comic books. And the difference between, the various differences are romance novel has a page count, but it's not like a 22 page count. Like the comic book page count, the retail space of pages really force stories to have specific rhythms. You can't, you can't have that long conversation in the middle of the book. People are gonna be like, well, what's going on here? Let me get back to Batman, flip a few pages and keep going. And those are that, I mean, and so when you say the title, that's super important. When did you and Brendan link up?
Grade 6.
Okay.
I think we were like 10 years old or something like that. And then we bonded over just like Star Wars and G.I. Joe and Transformers and mostly Robotech, Macross.
Dude.
Robotech. That's my whole jam. That's the only thing I'm like actually like I would say I'm actually a fan of. Like, okay. I love a lot of things, but Macross stuff I'll just buy. Like, I'm just like a total nerd for.
All right, so
Robotech Macross stuff.
Then the answer to this is most likely a yes. But in Death Transit, you have her pull out her gun on her leg, and it flips around, and it becomes the blasters, very similar to the second series of Robotech when they had the motorcycles.
Yeah, it's the third series. Like that blaster is like the blaster and her armor are very, very, very
reminiscent of, like, right, because that's the enemy's armor kind of looked like. I think they had didn't the enemy have armor that looked like that?
Her armor, Tanager's armor is basically a mashup of like the Samus Metroid armor and the transforming motorcycle. Armor. From the third arc of Robotech. So down to I've got a bunch of those, I don't know if I have stuff here, but I have a bunch of the toys that I just look at constantly, and I always love that design. So it's totally that.
Okay, cool. Well, that blaster got me into art school. Yeah. I was
it's one of the few blasters that are it's basically it's like a single piece, triangular. The other one I really liked were I don't know if you remember these, but the blasters from Disney's Black Hole movie.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Were super cool. It was like a handle with just the
prongs.
Yeah, 2 prongs off it, which I always thought was super cool. Yeah. But go on.
So I was, as an aforementioned, terrible student, and I had no idea what I was going to do. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't know how I was going to do it. And I went to a local college for a year, spinning my heels, kind of doing nothing, getting good grades, but not doing a thing. And my mom, the summer after that first year of college, goes, "So what are you going to do? Or what do you want to do?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I said I wanted to draw comics. And she's like, "All right." So she set up a couple meetings, one at SVA and one at the Kubert School. And they're like, "Well, we want to see a portfolio." I'm like, "Oh God." So I got to put together a portfolio. Well, I had built a full scale model of that blaster by hand. So this is 1986. I built that. And
just for laughs, you just like the blaster.
I like the design of the blaster. Yeah. So I drew it out and I did a blueprint drawing of it. Then I built, all the pieces out of cardboard. I made all the flat pieces, and I happened to be smart enough to make 2 sets. So I built one, had the flats, and I had the actual blueprints, and then I had a sketch. So that was one of my portfolio pieces, was having this sort of procedural, taking from a drawing and turning it into a dimensional piece. And they were very happy to see something like that. I think that showed that I could think more so than just sketch. So thank you, Macross.
Yeah, cool. That's great.
It was. I don't have it. I've long lost it. I had the little character of the motorcycle armor. Character is like a gray piece of plastic, single cast, that came with some other.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
I had I don't know if you remember the we could go down a pretty deep rabbit hole of Robotech stuff, but at one time when the show was kind of popular in syndication, the Matchbox did a line of toys.
Oh, cool!
They were action figures. I have a whole bunch of those. They were terrible. they were really shitty toys, but I had a lot of them, and so I could turn them around and look at properly at what between that and Robotech Art 1,
Yeah.
this was my Bible growing up for like just how to draw. Like it was just like this had like, not only was this sort of synopsis of every episode, but at the back they had like this page is creased because this guy is my favorite character.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, all of these original like Mikimoto character sketches and all the mech and stuff like that. Like I just had never seen this before. I picked this up at the Silver Snail comic store in Toronto, and it was just by my side for years. Still is, in fact. I went to
comic conventions are different in the 80s, but Creation, I think, was the people they ran the comic conventions in New York. And I went there, took the trains into New York City. I think it was like a sophomore or junior in high school. And I went in, and I've got my hands on all this cool because it was, it was all the macro stuff. So it was all the Japanese things. So I had the actual die cast models from Japan was it Bandai did them? And I got my hand on that's very similar.
The big ones, like the big transforming ones?
So I had a big one, and then they had a fully articulated but plastic one. It was kind of like this light brown Valkyrie, model. And they and then I got that Macros book similar to what you have, but it was Macros. It wasn't Robotech. And it was all in Japanese, so I couldn't read it. And then I got it was a model book by the model company, and they put out these diorama and kit pictures. So they would advertise the kit with a fully built painted piece in a diorama. And it was, I don't know, like a 50, 60 page book with all these different mechs. It was just mind blowing, exciting.
Yeah, I bet. Like we didn't get a lot of the like imported stuff. So, but like later on, I ended up finding that stuff. And then when I visited Japan, I just went hog wild.
Oh, I'll bet.
Buying like model kits and books and all that stuff. I might have I don't have it here, but I think I might have the Macross book you're talking about.
Okay, it was white with blue, like mostly blue elements on the cover.
Yeah, I think it's called Macross Perfect Memory or something.
That's like it. That's the one. Yeah,
it's great.
It was a good time. And when I went to art school in New York, it was great because there's a bunch of Japanese bookstores, so you could go there and get the actual manga from Japan in the sort of large format. So that's how I got Appleseed and all those kind of books. They were hugely inspirational. I never drew like that, but I was just so I think I was into the subject matter and the detail. Like those are the kind of things that I really kind of pulled from it.
It in particular was like, that series was sort of like a little more emotionally sophisticated than other cartoons I was watching, which I think is what really hooked me on it, is that it had all these complicated like love triangles and deeper themes in it, and I really super connected with it. And it's sort of it's kind of nuanced storytelling. I don't even know if it is anymore. Maybe it's like,
well, it seemed like
it's not. Yeah, at the time anyway. Like really informed a lot of my tastes and how I approached story. Like between that and then all of the Ghibli stuff that I saw later on, really informed how I approached storytelling, especially in terms of like pacing. It really freed me up to pace things the way I wanted to. And now I'm kind of like turning around on all that stuff. Like I just have different, I wouldn't say I'm conflicted, but I'm just exploring different ways I'm reading a lot of older comics now, like a lot of older American comics from like the 60s and 70s and stuff. And especially, I think this is a result of writing my own stuff. Like, I think I was always very, like, I kind of came into comics with like I was reading comics when I was younger, but like I didn't start thinking about comics as a career until like 89, 90.
Okay.
When, when all the Image guys, like before Image was formed, but when they were blowing,
but they were still at Marvel doing their thing.
Yeah. But when that kind of drawing and that kind of page layout were really popular. And so I approached the creation of comics from sort of that perspective for a long time, like just the idea of like creating an interesting looking page layout and like having like a focal point of the page and just like having interesting shapes and basically just focusing on it visually.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I started writing my own comics, I began to appreciate, I guess, just like, I don't know how to put it other than like, well, economy. And also like I had a sense of value, like cover price to content value.
Right.
Which I never had before. Like
Sure.
I never even considered it. But then I started thinking, well, I really like, I want, because I'm writing a story and I want a fulfilling story.
Yeah.
In this thing I'm doing, whether it's 8 pages or 16 pages or whatever. And it really got me thinking about like comics decompression and pacing in a way that I hadn't before. Like if you look at like ISOLA, which Brendan and I did at Image, is like super slow paced. Like there's a lot going on emotionally, but it's very, like not a lot of plot happens from issue to issue. It's like a very character driven kind of like plotting sort of thing. But when I'm working by myself and I'm writing, I feel like I just want to cram everything in there. And it's not because I want, it's not like a matter of showing off or wanting to like, wanting the reader to see everything. It's just, I want like, I want someone to pay their, whatever the hell it is now, $4.99
right.
for their comic and like have a whole story there.
Yeah.
I'm super conscious of it. So now when I'm writing for myself, I'm writing really dense pages, and I'm thinking about page much differently than I used to. In that's I don't so much care that there's like a visual focal point or something bombastic on the page. I just want to get through a scene in the most interesting way possible, and to fill it with, not necessarily fill it with text, but fill it with content.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And it really just sort of has like messed with my brain. Like it just like the way I think about, like I'm a little at odds with myself because on some level, I'm drawing the pages I've written and I'm like, oh man, like, is this a boring page? Like, I don't know. Like, is this a visually boring page? Like it becomes more clinical somehow. Yeah. Like it's not the same like abandonment, like
sure.
Like it feels like a different thing. Like I'm just more concerned with giving people a good story than I am with impressing anyone with art. And like maybe I think there's a middle ground there, and I don't know if
I know. I agree, and I think that's where like a lot of artists who write sort of end up landing on creators like Alex Toth and David Mazzucchelli. And you start looking at these people who are not telling bombastic stories visually, and they're telling dense, focused pages, and they're not boring. Like there's nothing visually boring about them because they are thinking about how this is done. It makes me think of this precursor to the Nam comic that not Larry Hama. How am I blanking on the writer? Anyway, it'll come to me. And Michael Golden did this short thing in Savage Tales. And there's this scene of the team sitting in the grass in Vietnam waiting for helicopters to pick them up. And it's all told with them in the same positions. And if wherever the camera goes, you can see the people and the trees and the elements in the background are all exactly as they were in the setting in this, the initial shot. So it's this really kind of interesting way of telling a story that you are getting these sort of like frozen moments in time, and it's all very visually exciting, but nothing's happening. It's characters being with themselves for a moment. Yeah.
I love that. Like I think that was my standard gear. for most of my career, like whenever possible. But now I feel like, for example, like I'm totally rethinking like mid-page scene transitions now, which is something like I would have like scoffed at
right
a couple of years ago. Like, but like, I read these old comics and like, well, now we're just changing scenes in the middle of this page. We're just going to this other place in the middle of a page. There's a panel with a new location, and like the sort of common like style is to you're going to end your page with that scene, and you're going to start your next scene on the next page. But now I don't know. Maybe why not? Like,
it's like a commercial break, like the page turn is the commercial break.
Yeah, it's very obvious. It's a very clear way to do things. But like I feel like maybe it's like maybe it's more interesting to not do that.
Like, listen, we all love Star Wars, and it has just a straight across wipe. Boom. Mm-hmm. Okay, now we're in a different scene.
Now we're here. Yeah,
like we're not.
They don't have to worry about page turns. Like you could do that.
But you're not but what you're not doing is you're not seeing people hopping into a spaceship or a vehicle and then taking off, and then next scene they're pulling in. Like, it's just, let's do a wipe.
Yeah,
we're just going to go.
That took a long time to learn too. Like the idea that you could, like when you're writing, I tend to, you write in this very linear way, or at least I do. And you're thinking, oh, okay, I've got to get these people from point A to point B, and we should probably see how that happens. But no, just cut to. Yeah, you cut to 3 days later if you want to.
As long as you don't lose the opportunity to advance your story, then you don't need it. If you can say, like, listen, I don't need to have this. Yes, you're creative and you're going to come up with some interesting stuff. You might come up with some good jokes. You might come up with a whole bunch of behaviors, but unless those behaviors, story, and elements and jokes have a payoff in the long term of the story, you don't need them. And in comics,
but it takes some brain rewiring, I think, to learn that you can do that stuff. It's not an obvious thing. Just like prior to it wasn't an obvious thing to do. I watched Pulp Fiction and had their minds blown, but like doing those kinds of nonlinear cuts between different scenes. It's just such an obvious thing. It's just a language that everyone's learned.
That's probably an advanced form of the language, but it's important because you don't need. He recognized you don't need to hand this thing into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like, you don't film films that way, so why should we cut films that way? Like, it's kind of clever. Have you seen Oppenheimer yet?
No.
Okay.
Yet.
Well, then we won't go into that. But I think one thing that Nolan really does is I think if I could say he has one sort of move, is his obsession with time. Like, time is the element in his films. If you think about it, Memento, there's a whole time sequence in that the Batman movie with the Joker. Like, everything is very time structured, and Oppenheimer has a very interesting play on time as well. So I think he's like telling 3 or 4 story timelines, at the same time. And it's pretty, it looks great. I'd like to read the screenplay and see how it matches up against what the film.
Yeah, I'm sure you can find it online somewhere. It would be probably illuminating.
Hey, Gabriel, if you're listening, I want that screenplay. So there you go. So you mentioned something about the Marvel style of script writing, and what you just said made me think about it a little deeper in the story, and like what's valuable and what's not valuable. Like, I don't need to show them going from point A to point B. And I think that Marvel style of writing actually is very helpful in that respect, because you're really just giving the meat and not so much bread for that meal. And I remember the most sort of vivid example of a Marvel style script, because the ones I got were mostly it would be like page 1, and it would have a whole bunch of like just actions. Here's what's happens on this page. Rarely was it broken down into panels. It was just like, here's what's happening on the page. And then it would be page 4 through 7. And it would be a bunch of stuff. And then it was like my job to kind of take a pencil and say, well, that seems like a page and this seems like a page, and then kind of figure it out. But we got our hands on John Byrne's script for John Romita Jr. doing Iron Man back in like 1990. And man, it was like 3 paragraphs. Maybe it was a page. I don't know. But it was so short for a whole entire issue. It was just paragraphs, chunk body copy.
I'd love to see that. I know that I wonder if Byrne was writing like that. He probably wrote like that for himself. But I wonder if he wrote like that for everyone, because part of me thinks that people just wrote like that for Romita Jr., because I feel like he was always getting scripts like that, where he was, he'd just get like a synopsis, like not even page beats, and have to. Well,
we surmised it was just him, because we're like, well, he's so good, he doesn't need all the stuff that we need. That was our sort of our art college mentality. We didn't know any better, but yeah, I mean, I would, I guess, my question would be like to Ann Nocenti, like, did you write? Is that how you wrote your scripts for Daredevil for him? It'd be interesting to find out how everyone did them, or did they have their own way of doing it?
But I think speaking of that, like, I think when I first was in touch with Marvel, when I was much younger, like when I was just first sending in samples, like one of the guys there was cool enough to and this was before I even had proper samples. Like I happened, like I had a friend who worked at a video store, and I had drawn something on like the dry erase board at this video store. And my friend called me like the next day and said, hey, this guy just saw your drawing, and his cousin is the art director at Marvel Comics, and he wants to know if you want to get in touch. And I was like, so I was like, okay. And I grew up like in this like rural, like a pretty small town, so that was a weird thing. But my point was going to be that I did get in touch with that guy. I visited the offices before I had anything to show. Like I was just like a super green kid. And he was cool enough to give me some scripts to practice on. And one of them, I think, was one of the Ann Nocenti Daredevil scripts that Romita Jr. drew, because I remember looking at the issue later. And it was like, I don't think it was super detailed. I think it was a fairly loose breakdown, which I think is what got my mind thinking that Romita Jr. just always worked from like Marvel style scripts.
It could be. And I mean, and also like we're also overlooking, what you mentioned earlier about the idea of like those long phone calls and, kind of back and forth. And there's, why wouldn't Byrne and Romita have those calls? Why wouldn't, John and Annie have those calls? Like that seems to be a legitimate thing. Like, hey, let's figure out, what do we want to do this year? How do we want it? Because they weren't doing issues. They were doing years of these comic books.
Do you know that, like, this blew my mind, like when I just realized, because I've been going through like lots of old Byrne Claremont X-Men comics lately, and Days of Future Past it's a 2-issue story.
Yeah.
That just blew my mind. Like the idea that came out, and like if someone were to write that now, it would be
the annual event
thing. Yeah, it was 2 issues.
2 issues.
Like incredible. Speaking of just economy.
Oh, completely. I mean, listen, it is an era of there was a lot more in the terms of narrative dialogue and thought balloons and verbose dialogue balloons. So they were getting a lot in those issues on top of the artwork. But the older I get and the more I talk about it, Chris's Herculean efforts on that title for 3 decades, it's GOAT territory. It's the kind of thing that like, this can't be duplicated. I mean, I know Eric Larson's been writing his comic book for a long time, and I know there are other people doing these things for a very, very long time, but they're doing it for themselves. They're not servicing somebody else's property and not managing how many creators over the course of that time. I mean, it's nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. I've become really nostalgic for, I don't know if it's nostalgia. Maybe it's not nostalgia. I think it's more of like a renewed appreciation for the way that those stories were put together at the time. Because I've been like, now when I go to a comic store, there was a long stretch where I didn't go to comic stores at all. Now I kind of get really psyched about seeking them out wherever, like especially in like small towns and things, because like I don't really care about what's on the new release shelf. I just go straight to the bins and start digging around for interesting things, because like the stuff it used to be that like you wouldn't want to drop $5 on an issue in a back issue bin because like, well, it's too expensive. But now like the back issue stuff is the same price or cheaper than what's on the stand. So like if I'm going to buy something, I'm just going to go to the classics and like buy all that stuff. If I'm going to spend $10 an issue on something, I'll just go buy like old like old classic X-Men issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I mean, who knows, man? You could pick up a whole bunch of issues of Crystar, the Crystal Warrior, and read those and come up with an idea, then like get your hands on that license and do a thing, and
that's all Andy and I do now. It's like we just go and buy old, like we've got stacks of all these old, like I've got all these old ROM Space Knight comics here. Look at this. This is like, we just brought this, but I don't even know, like I've never read this, but look at this cover.
Luke Cage Power Man.
It's such a great cover.
That's like 1975.
Yep, probably something like that.
Yeah.
It's issue 33 of Luke Cage Power. Anyway, we just have a ton of this stuff around now because it's like, $2, $5. It's like cheaper than buying whatever.
Right.
And there's like 3 times the amount of story.
Sure. Don McGregor wrote it. There's 3 times the amount of the story in there. Yeah. But that does kind of go back to what you're saying. And I wanted to ask you, when you said about servicing the reader, and putting a lot into the comic book to make it a satisfying thing. Do you think that's a reaction to doing these smaller story runs, so to speak, like say for DC, versus, hey, Karl, you're going to be writing, a Batman title or any title for the next year or two. Like, here's a contract for 2 years of writing. Do you think you would reframe your storytelling approach to be able to kind of break things up into like bigger chunks and move, and spread it out over time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because certainly, when you're given smaller jobs, you want to take every opportunity to knock it out of the park and make it worthwhile. If I had the space to pace something over a year, I don't know. I think I'd still try to be as pretty dense with it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like 22 pages, or whatever, 20 or 22 pages goes by so quickly. It's hard to. It's kind of hard to write for that. But I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I think I would like to have each issue kind of as self-contained as possible. But part of that pacing might have just come from the fact that people, like maybe they had longer stories to tell, but also like it was just easier to stretch one idea out over 3 issues.
Oh, for sure.
Come up with a new thing every issue, especially if you're doing a character like Batman that's been like written to death. Like there's only like you kind of are struggling to come up with new things to do.
And I think that, and listen, I think, if you are, a professional comic book writer, you have to find ways to like, you can't sit and face every issue as a single issue. You can't just like, okay, got to have 12 original ideas this year.
You go crazy. You might do it. You might do an incredible 12 issue run of something. Sure. But it'd be exhausting.
Yeah. You might have to take 6 years off to get back into mental space for it. But, so I think the idea of like, okay, here's an idea. How far can I stretch this idea? 3 issues? Cool. Oh, this one can go 6. Okay. Like, you can find, how much meat you can find on the bone for those kinds of things. And
did Miller ever do standalone issues of Daredevil in his run, or were they all kind of?
I think he had to have had. I think he had to have, because the way, because they had to have protected themselves on the schedule. There had to be ways to save that. And there are issues. I think there are gaps in his run where he may not have been drawing the whole time. But he had a great partner in Klaus who really, really could interpret what Frank needed with far, far less work on Frank's end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was mostly like choreography, really. Like if you see Frank's pencils on a lot of that, especially the later Daredevil stuff, it just looks like Klaus did a lot of heavy lifting there. Like all the story beats were there and amazing, but so much of it is just the finishes.
Yeah, and I think Klaus was probably credited as finisher. I think probably somewhere in the 3/4 run of their time together.
Mm-hmm.
I was his assistant for like a hot minute. And I think the reason being is I just kept asking him questions about all the stuff in his flat files. So, but he was great, and he pulled out everything and Daredevil pages and Dark Knight pages and that stuff. And it was just like,
I love his work that he just does on his own. Like, I think Jansen's amazing. Like I found some old Punisher issues he had done. Yep. He might have written them too. I can't remember.
His coloring, dude. I think he's one of the greatest colorists. His palette is unlike anybody else's, and it's beautiful. It's not this crazy bold, colors like you're seeing on the screen now. I mean, it's really subtle and thoughtful, and we're talking old school Dr. Martin dye coloring, not fancy dancy colors of now.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. We were in interesting territory for a second. So we were talking about the runs of doing things, and do you have, like, as you said earlier about like writing a script in the case of somebody else would draw it. Do you think about that in the terms of like you would like to write something for someone to draw?
Yes, I would theoretically, because like part of my brain is really resistant to it, even though I know there are people like the I know it's a collaborative medium and everything, but like I've gotten so used to just doing things myself that it's hard to relinquish.
Yeah,
control. It's just hard to trust people. Like you don't like it. I'm sure. Like I think that's really that's kind of narrow-minded thinking on my part.
No.
I'm aware of it, like
human.
because yeah, totally, it is. But like I also completely get that, like that collaborative process means you could end up with some really amazing work, right? It's just scary. So, but if given the opportunity, I would like to do that. I was thinking of I have ideas for things that I've written synopses for that I think would be fun to do independently, like to self-publish or to Kickstarter or something like that. That I just don't have time for all that stuff, Like, and it would be. Sometimes I'll have other people specifically in mind for these things as I'm thinking about them. It would be interesting to do some kind of writing for some mainstream characters that I didn't have to draw.
Yeah.
I don't know if that'll happen. I think it could. Like, I don't think there's any reason it couldn't.
Listen, they the way the system is set up, it seems to me, is that they're not putting on artists on books for 1 year, 2 year stints. Like they break these things up into shorter chunks and they give them longer times to get the work done. So it kind of feels like that there's a lot more gap time with, with books. And when you have a transition between, one creative team to another, if a writer's leaving, there's a great opportunity, for those sort of single issues to come out. And, if you want to do that sort of, because listen, I love a single issue. I love the idea. Like, if someone said, hey, write what like make your own design of what you'd want to do in comic books. Like one of the things I would love to do is just do standalone single issues for a bunch of different titles. Because those are the things that live in my heart so vividly.
They're the things that, as a collector, like a long time ago, would kind of frustrate me. But then every once in a while, you get, if you were following a series especially if you're following it for a specific artist or writer, and then they were gone for that issue, it was frustrating. But also, so many, I've discovered so many, amazing artists through those fill-in issues that it's hard to deny. Like when you see people get that like a one issue chance to do something and they just kill it.
Yeah, It's the opening
I remember,
band.
like, Glenn Dillon was one.
Oh yeah.
Like, I remember reading Shade the Changing Man, and I loved Chris Bachalo's work on it.
Oh yeah.
And then, like, I think Glenn Dillon came on for like an issue fill-in, and it just blew my mind. And he's just been one of my favorite guys ever since. Not enough Glenn Dillon comics in the world. His graphic novel that he did a few years ago is still one of my favorite things. I recommend it to everybody.
Yeah.
It's called The Now of Brown. It's really great.
Yeah, I mean, they're the opening acts of concerts, and not enough attention is paid to them. But you know, every big band was an opening act, and if you get lucky, you get to see one that just blows your mind, and you're like, "Whoa, I've got a new thing." How do you? So, like with your stories, you know, you said your mind is sort of preoccupied with ideas of stories, and when you're working on a story, what is your collection method, and what is your sort of scheduling method? Like, how do you like say, like, when am I going to pay attention to this?
It's hard. I'm getting a little better at it because I would just keep piling stuff onto my plate between like the web comic and the Kickstarter stuff and the like actual work for hire stuff. I kind of always thought I had more time than I really did to you know, you can sort of justify juggling all these things by saying like, okay, I'll work on this on Monday and I'll work on this on Tuesday and Wednesday and try to break it up, but it never quite works out for me that way. So I recently started I just think being more realistic about the amount of time I have and chunking things into. Actually, I got my wife to help me. She because I was panicking one day. I said, I just don't know like how, like I've got too much. I need a project manager basically.
Right.
And so she, I'm terrible at time management. And so she helped me, like we made a chart, sat down with some couple beers in the kitchen, and she made a spreadsheet for me, and it just basically like just lists all the different things I'm working on or want to be working on, and like how much time I have to do each of them, like which ones have strict deadlines, how much I have to, each one I have to work on. So it helped me to just wake up in the morning not feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So I wake up and I'm like, here's what I'm working on today, and then just not think about anything else, because that's where I fall apart.
So nice. It's so nice to know what you have to do rather than that panicky feeling of, oh, okay, this is in front of me, take care of this thing. And then you're like, oh, you've spent too long doing that. Now you got to go catch up on another thing. Yeah,
it's madness inducing. It's why I like doing the Kickstarters so much, because even though they're a lot of work, like during that 30-day campaign, I wake up with a single objective.
Right.
You know, like I'm like, I got to wake up and I'm going to just start promoting this Kickstarter. I'm just going to be online doing this, and this. I'm going to draw some stuff. I'm going to talk to, whatever. Like there's a very clear work order that I'm following. And so like I'm trying to implement that in the rest of my stuff. So I guess in answer to your question, like once I know what I'm focusing on, it's a lot of just putting on like appropriate music and going for long walks until like I sort out the like I collect ideas that way. That's basically how I collect all my ideas. It's just like for this Batman story I'm working on, it was just putting on some soundtrack music and then walking around and letting this music sort of inform or inspire like visuals and scenes, and then just like having this. Then I like go home after my walk and I'd write down a bunch of things like here are some scenes that I just thought of that I would like to see in here.
Yep.
And then like see where that goes, like see if they all kind of what stuff fits together and what stuff doesn't. And then I don't do a lot of like actual writing until I spend ages just wandering around or like standing in the shower, like letting my mind wander.
Right. Well, it's I mean, so like I said, I didn't write today because I had to work on a presentation for a project for a client. And I've been working on this thing sort of in a similar fashion. I've been collecting ideas, thinking about this, kind of putting all these musings together. A lot of writing, like I do a lot of writing for my design work because I like to think everything out, whether it's longhand or on the computer. And then I was really like last night I'm saying to my wife, I'm like, I'm kind of freaking out because I don't have this whole thing together. Like I'm missing something. But then like I just sat down yesterday and I put the presentation deck together. And what that was the outline of the story. And the story came together in pieces because like I knew the things I needed to put in there. I just didn't maybe have the answers for them. So all of a sudden that placeholder for the thing was sitting there. I'm like, and it had a title. I'm like, oh, okay, I just need to make that thing. And then my head could take all these other pieces that I had, written down, collected, or had sort of held into static and put it together and go, okay, that's what I need. And then I made a visual reference of that, whatever it was, whether it's swipe or a sketch or whatever the thing needed to be. And stories, that's kind of the way, like what you're saying, like I get that sensibility, like where it's a whole, like put these things together. I do a lot of free association when I write. So I sit down and if I have the idea of whatever the premise is, the character is, maybe some events that happen that I want to have happen. And I sit down and I'll start writing that sort of free association beat thing, just kind of going, okay, this and that and that and this, and then start moving things around and letting those things, once they start touching, inform another option. And then it kind of builds from that.
Mm-hmm. So I like that approach. Like I haven't really tried that so much, but what it reminds me of is something like I learned relatively recently, like in the last few years, I'm embarrassed to say, which is that I realized that like, unless you're actually writing something, you're not writing. Because I spent decades thinking that if I was wandering around thinking of interesting stories, no matter how much I thought about that story,
right,
or how detailed it was in my head, if I wasn't writing it down into a structure, then it was not writing.
Right.
It's just a bunch of garbage that's floating around in there, and it doesn't actually take any shape. There's nothing sane about it or legible about it until I actually write. And like I just lived under this sort of misconception for years that I was, I guess, yes, you're sort of working on it. Things are percolating, but until something's on the page, like there's really nothing.
You can't fix something that isn't there.
Yeah, you can't even see the problems until they're written down, and you don't even know what. Like so much happens as you're describing. So much happens in association from words written on a page that you can't account for when you're just letting things swim around in your head.
Yeah,
and it's like I don't know if it was just it's where discipline comes in, frankly. Like because like we can all daydream, but when you actually have to sit down and make a thing work, which is the actual art or job of writing. It's like the entire purpose of writing is to organize thoughts.
Yes.
Right. Like before you do that, nothing is organized. It's just a lot of feelings and things that you may or may not be able to capture.
Yeah. And they don't, yeah. And it's tough. And I think a lot of it has to do, with not disappointing ourselves, like, because if it's not good or great, then why bother? And, that's why most people don't make things.
It's also just work. Like the point at which it becomes work is when most people just won't do it.
But it's fun.
It's hard. It's super fun.
Yes.
It's so much fun, but it's also at times extremely difficult.
It's so hard. It is.
Like sometimes it takes years to make those connections.
Dude, listen, I've drawn comic books. I've brought brands into this world, international brands. I've done all these very impressive things to my career, but there's nothing harder than writing a story. it's so much work. It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle while juggling and riding a unicycle, while people are shooting BB guns at you. Like, it's just so hard.
Yeah, but it's addictive and amazing. It's like there's really no feeling.
I feel like some sort of like weirdo preacher, week after week with artists, where I'm just like, so why aren't you writing a story? And they're like, well, I just draw. I'm like, no, write a story. Like, I'm so trying to get like everybody to do it, because I think it's just so helpful. Even if that's not what you end up wanting to do, being able to write a story for yourself and then be able to write a story for someone else, it's going to make you so much better.
Those two things alone are really different. I'm discovering, but also like I say all the time, like I would rather read someone's weird, indulgent, imperfect comic that they've written and drawn themselves than a polished collaboration. I'm just interested in, like it's when a person is laid bare. You just want to see, you just want to hear that person's authentic voice and see what it is that's interesting to them, and like that's what you get from work like that, like work that's like a single creator, single vision.
You're totally right, and I listen, I don't love one more than the other. Like I love them all. But the further that you get down the road, the more you can appreciate all these really interesting, unique versions of the art form. I can, yeah, sure, I'm always going to love the X-Men, or I'm going to love that really amazing thing. But it's also, there's so many great smaller things. And it's so funny because like this whole conversation, we haven't been talking about artifice at all. Like we haven't talked about your artwork, and you're great. And, maybe we'll talk at another time about your art, but it's a fascinating subject, to sort of experience or to hear your experience as you progress into this kind of this environment of telling stories now at different levels.
Mm-hmm. It feels like ultimately, like I'm happiest when I'm learning. I think humans are just happiest when they're learning, and so it's just of much greater interest to me to be learning as a like learning story as a writer, as opposed to learning. Like, I mean, like there's tons of room for me to become a better artist. Sure. Don't get me wrong.
Right. None of us are Alex Toth, right?
So. Yeah. Like, but at the moment, I just find it really. I'm just hungry to do it, and to do more of it and learn more as I'm doing it.
I think it's great. What kind of stuff, for listeners who aren't familiar with you, can they find of yours around now, or they can look for that you want them to find?
Well, okay. Well, basically everything's on my website. If you go to Karl,
it's a great website.
Thank you. That's another thing I like. I just like building websites. Mm-hmm. Like I just like techie kind of things, like teaching myself programming languages and things like that. I'm not good at that either, but I do enjoy it as a different sort of pursuit. But yeah, on my website you can read all of my my webcomic, The Abominable Charles Christopher. That's all there in its entirety for free. You can read Death Transit Tanager issue 1. It's all on there. I'm working on issue 2 now. That's my kickstarted space comic that I'm doing, which I'm really, really enjoying doing. It's also like a black and white kind of manga inspired thing. I'm doing some Batman stuff. I recently did. Trying to remember everything I've done. I did a series called Gotham Academy at DC, which I'm really proud of, that I worked on with Becky Cloonan and Brendan Fletcher, and that's just been reprinted. But I've done like a few different short stories with those characters that have been published in Batman Black and White and in the main Batman series, and I'm working on another one now for The Brave and the Bold. So those are really fun. I just did an issue of Mark Miller's Ambassadors comic.
Oh, cool.
That was just collected. Yeah, I did issue 2 of that. That was a neat experience because every issue was drawn by a different artist.
Yeah.
And I really like Mark and Mark's work. So that was a fun thing to work on. That was full script. That was like, he just writes a great script. You know?
Oh, good.
So it's here actually. I just got comps for the issue. It's got a Frank Quitely cover.
Nice.
Quitely did the first issue. I did issue 2. It's got Travis Charest doing an entire issue of comics since I don't know when. Olivier Coipel, Matteo Buffani, Matteo Scalera. It's amazing. Yeah, it's a really, really fun project.
It's kind of a murderer's row. It's a great one.
Right?
Yeah.
Super cool. And my image series Isola, which has been on hold for a couple of years, but we plan to get back to. That's like a kind of fantasy adventure thing with a tiger in it. That's a lot of fun. That's like that book is really near and dear to my heart because it's kind of like it was sort of designed to be like a Ghibli paste sort of story that is sort of blending my kind of mainstream superhero work with like a lot of my webcomic stuff, which is very like wildlife centric. So it's like a lot of animals and forests and things like that.
It's cool.
People with swords. So yeah,
swords. You can't go wrong with swords.
That's really fun. And it's beautifully colored by Michelle Azar-Asapon, who is like a sister to me. She's one of my favorite collaborators. And yeah, I don't know. I can't think of anything else offhand. But if you go to my website, it's all.
I'll get the links will all be in the body of this, so they'll be able to find you there.
Also, actually, I should mention, like, if you're into process and stuff, like I know I don't have a Patreon page, but I basically set up the equivalent of a Patreon thing on my website. It's a subscription, like a monthly pay what you want subscription thing. But I bring it up only because, like, I post, like, for the last couple of things I did, I post all of the process, like my initial idea sheets, my synopses, the full scripts, my rough breakdowns, like basically the entire process of creating one of these short stories that I've done recently. And I think like that stuff I'd like to see more of from other people. I like seeing process stuff. So all that stuff's on my website.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. I think that's, listen, it's invaluable if you're trying to learn how to do it. And it's exciting when you already do it to see someone else, how they solve those problems. It's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, congrats again and good luck on the wrapping up of the Kickstarter.
Thank you. This is a fun talk.
Yeah,
I feel like we just got going.
I know. I looked at the clock. I'm like, oh wow, okay. Well, we've just, and it really feels like we just started. But maybe we'll come back and we'll talk about a few other things down the road. And my hats off to your wife and to Andy's wife for being the people who can clearly are making a huge impact in your lives as creators. Because it's having a good partner is important.
She's so supportive.
So shout out, Karl. Thanks for doing this, man. I really was excited. I had a great time talking with you in person, and I just knew we were going to have a nice chat. Yeah, me too. I was looking forward to it. I'm going to be at New York Comic Con this October. So if you're around, we can connect again. September, October? What is that? October 12th to 15th, I think. Yeah. I'm sharing a table with Andy, so we'll be there hanging out. I might be up in town for that because that sounds about around the time the thing I'm working on will be happening. It'll be in New York City. So that would be great. So we'll see you then. That'd be great. All right. Well, until then, get all the other stuff you have to get done. Keep writing, keep drawing, and hang loose, man. All right? I will. Thanks, Alex.